You mentioned that Japan has either increased their gold holdings or just announced that they own more gold than was first thought. What is this telling us? Are central banks moving into gold more rapidly than you've seen in the past, or is this a sign of things to come?
Both. They are accelerating their purchases, and I do think it's a sign of things to come. Now, when you talk about retail, so everyday investors, Americans, I love America, but I've kind of given up on Americans and gold. They just there are people who have positions, and your hedge funds will have paper gold, they'll do gold futures, but the everyday American has been 40 years at this point of being miseducated on the topic of gold. So they're not very much into gold. You go around the world, you get very different results. Switzerland, Germany, Austria, they love gold. Of course, China, Asian countries. I think Australians have a much better sense than Americans do. So there are the buyers of gold. But you say, well, okay, who are the big buyers of gold? The answer is the central banks. Now, right there, that should tell you something. So these are the most powerful, most plugged in, most heavily monetary institutions in the world. And they're the ones buying gold. Now, they would have you believe that gold's not money, gold serves no purpose. It's the first ones to say, John Maynard Keynes said it was a barbarous relic, which he never said, by the way. He said something, he used the phrase barbarous relic in reference to the gold exchange standard of the 1920s, which was a hybrid gold foreign currency standard, but the foreign currency is not gold. So he said that's a barbarous relic, but he never said that about gold himself. And actually, toward the end of his life, he favored, at Bretton Woods, he favored a global currency called the backward, backed by gold.
Inflation is asking for action, and action now.
And it's not guesswork. There were papers he published at the time, and that was rejected by the United States, which kind of ran the show, partly because our not to get too down with these, but our Undersecretary of the Treasury, who was our representative at Bretton Woods, was a Stalinist agent. He was a communist. This didn't come out until the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, when a lot of the classified information was released, all the KGB files, etc. But it was revealed and fully documented in a book by Ben Style called Battle of Bretton Woods, that he was a communist agent. So what was he trying to do by insisting that, by running Keynes's idea off the road, insisting that the US dollar be the anchor? He was trying to destroy the British Empire, which he did, because he knew that there were far more claims on the Bank of England than they had gold, and that would be inherently unstable, and that would derail sterling as one of the global reserve currencies and undermine the British Empire, which it did. So that's a little bit of a backstory, but it goes to the point that Keynes was an advocate for gold at different times in his career and at the end of his career, and that when the central banks are buying, that should tell you something. Now, I've said for years, I've always pointed to Russia and China. Russia has almost quadrupled their gold reserves in the last 12 years, starting in 2009 through 2021. They've almost quadrupled, from about 600 tons to about 2,400 tons. China, the same. Not quite, from about 600 tons to about just under 2,000 tons that they report, but they're non-transparent. They have a lot more gold than that stashed in something called SAFE, the State Administration on Foreign Exchange, which is a secretive Chinese sovereign wealth fund run by an ex-PIMCO guy, by the way. He knows what he's doing. And they're non-transparent. So the People's Bank of China is kind of transparent. SAFE is non-transparent. So every 6-7 years, what you'll see is the People's Bank of China will announce, oh, we've increased our gold reserves by 400 tons or 500 tons or whatever, as the case may be. And well, it sounded like they went out the night before and bought 600 tons. Good luck trying that. You can't do it. Well, what it means is that SAFE took some of the hidden gold that they had been acquiring slowly, accounting entry, moved it over to the People's Bank of China, and boom, there's 500 tons overnight. But of course, they had it all along, and they still do. So they probably have more. So Russia and China are big acquirers, again, tripling or quadrupling their gold reserves. But now we're seeing it in a lot of other countries. The Philippines, Vietnam, Mexico, Iran is a major buyer, but non-transparent. Turkey has drastically increased its gold reserves. These are major countries, and they're adding. So I look at that, and there's very good data from the IMF and the World Gold Council, so you can find this information. But the one that was just like not doing anything was Japan. They had about 600 tons, but they had 600 tons for 30 years. I went back and looked at all the old data. It was like 30, never, that was boring. Who cares about Japan? 600 tons. And then just about, at this point, about 6 months ago, so late last summer, they bumped it by, I believe it was 50 tons, perhaps more. I look at the exact number, but it was over 50 tons overnight. It just went from 600 tons to 650 tons, just like that. Well, here's what you know. Same thing I said about Russia. You can't buy 50 tons overnight, or you couldn't even do it in a month. I mean, the dealers would be working the order, it would be disruptive to the market. It would leave a lot of fingerprints, put it that way. But what it tells you is two things. Number one, Japan had the gold all along. They had it in some sidecar or side account or Ministry of Finance hidden account, as the case may be. And they chose to move it over to their reserve position, which they can do. That's an accounting entry. But they had to have had the gold all along, because you can't buy that much that fast. So then that begs the question, well, why all of a sudden? Why now, after decades of holding your gold level constant, do you all of a sudden step up in a big way? A lot of possible answers to that. One, China's making noises about invading Taiwan. Well, if you're going to invade Taiwan, why not invade Japan while you're at it? It's just another chain of islands as far as the Chinese are concerned. And after this happened right around the time, maybe shortly after the U.S. debacle in Afghanistan, which was, the worst foreign policy, military disgrace, humiliation in U.S. history that I can remember. I don't know how far you'd have to go back to find a worse turn of events. And that there it was. Well, all of a sudden, allies all over the world, Israel, Japan, Taiwan, they're questioning the United States. Like, hey, we're under your nuclear umbrella. You stand by us through thick or thin. Here you leave Americans behind enemy lines. So perhaps, now this is speculation, but perhaps Japan sees the threat to Taiwan, feels they may be in the sights of the Chinese, feels the United States may not be as reliable as one had thought, and says, well, we now have to step up a little bit financially, militarily, et cetera. And they're doing that. But that aside, that's a little geopolitical speculation, but that aside, the gold is real. They put it on the books. So the biggest buyers of gold in the world are the central banks. By the way, from 1970 to 2010, central banks were net sellers. Now, some bought and some sold, but on net, they were net sellers. We had Brown's bottom in 1999 when the UK sold half their gold at the lowest price in about 60 years. they literally hit the bottom at about $200 an ounce, give or take. But since 2010, central banks in the aggregate have been net buyers, and that buying is accelerating. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the most knowledgeable players in the world are adding gold to their reserves because they consider that a prudent hedge to the US dollar, if you have US dollar inflation, or to collapse the confidence in central bank currencies generally, or they're just saying, hey, we're part of the club.